Dennis is a vice chancellor over at NC State, and he's my partner in crime around smart cities. It was over 2.5 years ago we met, and it was around the Smart DOT initiative. And in that effort, it was, wow, we believe the City of Raleigh and NC State could partner, thank you, could partner and help us win that award. It didn't work out. It was actually awarded to Columbus, but out of that came a relationship where we said, hey, let's do an MOU with NC State. You have all of these scientific researchers and a lot of brain power that doesn't have a place to, I'll call it, apply that brain power. So we came up with the MOU around smart cities, and we collaborate quite a bit trying to figure out what is going on in the industry and how it could apply to the City of Raleigh. With that, I wanted to point out a couple of things off of Dennis's bio that I didn't know about him. And it says, as a former IBM career executive, he led development of the first New York Stock Exchange floor trading system. That is impressive. And the other part is, in 2008, he co-founded Image Optics Corporation to commercialize NC State optical technology and is a board chair. But the one thing that I find really interesting, and it was about 2 years into our relationship, he's getting nervous now. He went to Clemson University and has been able to take that, come into the Research Triangle area, is a leader at NC State, and I would have thought Dennis bled red as I talked to him. So I was quite surprised to learn that he went to Clemson University. So I'm going to leave that alone and say, without further ado, here is Dennis.
Okay. Somebody introduced me one day as the bravest man at NC State, and then he went on to explain that he has a license plate that says "Go Tigers" parked downstairs in the parking lot. So, anyway, my little time here is going to be not as organized as Darnell's and Ruth B's. First of all, of course, we're part of a university. We don't profess to be all that organized sometimes because university structures are quite different. But NC State's really a very large university, 2,400 faculty, 7,000 staff people, 35,000 students, research expenditures in excess of $500 million this past year. So it's a big enterprise. And what I wanted to share with you a little bit is some thoughts on how you might engage with the university. I represent the partnership office, and our job is to be the dot connectors. We try to connect people. And rather say what we're doing at NC State, putting SCADA systems to improve energy flow, I thought maybe just throw some examples of some areas where you might think about how it would relate to smart cities going forward. This is by no means comprehensive. You know, when you got an institution that large with 10 colleges and everything, you have a lot of different details. Before I do that, though, I was making reference one time to the silos that we have becoming as part of a Research One University. And a faculty member came up to me and he says, you know, we prefer you refer to us as cylinders of excellence. So we have a lot of cylinders of excellence over there. And these are the kinds of things that you should think about and maybe being able to tap as part of this huge knowledge base at the university. So with that, I listed a few areas that up here, and I'll just show you an example of each one. They're very intentionally diverse, the examples, just to give you kind of a flavor of the kind of capabilities that are there at the university that could lend itself as part of the R&D component of rolling out smart cities over time. So they range from clean air, clean energy, advanced manufacturing, the user experience, cyber defense, mobility, wearables, and so forth. So I'm going to flip through a few of these just and talk about each one of them just to give you a little flavor of what's there and the kind of resource. So here's one. This is a result of the Freedom Center, also in conjunction with PAWR America. Freedom stands for Future Renewable Electric Energy Delivery and Management Systems. It's a 10-year effort funded by the National Science Foundation. It's all about the smart grid, things like solid-state transformers and so forth. And the reason I mentioned the other institute, PAWR America, because it's all about wide bandgap semiconductors or compound materials to replace silicon. The idea behind those in PAWR America is those new technologies are much more robust, much more efficient, and can make a big change in the energy profile of the world, over a long period of time. So one of the faculty members there has been working on chargers. And here, an example one is, especially if you think of big vehicles like buses and so forth, because they've gone to these newer wide bandgap materials, they can reduce the profile, the physical size of these things by an order of magnitude, to say nothing of making them much more efficient. So that's a resource that's of two different institutes. One's a manufacturing institute, the other one is a Engineering Research Institute at NC State, just to give you a little flavor of it. Another example would be CAMAL. CAMAL stands for the Center for Additive Manufacturing and Logistics. It's located on the main campus. It has additive, I should say 3D printing, which is additive materials to create parts and so forth, as well as more traditional takeaway materials, subtractive type things. And those are just some of the machines they have. They have an extraordinarily well-equipped lab. Now, why is that relevant? Well, if you start thinking about experimental work, and I'll mention some coming up, think of the capabilities to make something as simple as a heat sink, or maybe an enclosure, or maybe a mount to mount, you heard earlier people talking about antennas on the poles for 5G. Well, what get beyond that in the prototype phase? So this is a center that people can go to and have work done. They make parts, for example, for prosthetics in the College of Veterinary Medicine. Like an animal may have lost a leg, they can create a prosthetic device. I even saw one part over there one day where they replaced a skull fragment of someone that was in an accident. That material had to be very critically machined or printed with a porous nature because of the heat conductivity. And so this is pretty exotic stuff, but that's that capability that's there at the university. And that particular institute or center is located on the main campus. Also, what about the human experience? This shot here is a partnership between NC State and LexisNexis. LexisNexis is a partner on our Centennial campus with approaching, I think, 725 people on campus. You typically think of LexisNexis as legal software, but they do a lot more than that, and there's a great partnership. And as you were to go into the lobby off to the right in their building in 1801 Varsity Drive, you'll see this room or set of rooms where people can work together and collaborate, people with the college design, computer science, and so forth. And what they're looking at is new ways to solve problems. LexisNexis is interested in making the human interfaces of their products easier to use, graphical GUIs, as we call them, graphical user interfaces, and so forth. So if you think about a smart city, and if you think of things like the human experience, making it easier for people to access resources and everything, here's the place where you can do experimental work. They also do these kind of works and so forth in the various colleges, like the College of Design, College of Architecture. You heard some of that earlier this morning. Here's one, and Michael Bender presented earlier today the Lab for Analytic Science. You know, that's sponsored by the NSA, and they do a lot of work, obviously, in the security domain. And there's so many different things you have to be concerned with in this day and age when you think of access to data and hacking and so forth. But it goes beyond just that particular institute. That's a partnership in conjunction with the university and other corporations and so forth in the region. But there's also analytic work in security and computer science, electrical and computer engineering that Tim talked about as well. So that's another area. Here's one, and that prototype vehicle's out there in the lobby today. Dr. Seth Holler and Marshall Brain have led this development, and they're building several more of these vehicles. And people sometimes say, well, isn't Google building an autonomous electric vehicle and so forth? And I said, sure, a lot of people are doing that. But the focus here is to make it very low cost, very lightweight, and easily to solve the last mile problem. If you think of smart cities and that last mile problem, once you get off the mass transit, well, where do you go then? And you think, especially of an area like if you were to have a light rail system that drop people off in the park, how do you now get to IBM, Tim, or how do you get to Cisco and so forth? But if you could just take your app out and dial up, one of these things came up, took you there, and that would be it. So that's the notion behind that. And they're not just talking about this. Those students that work for Seth, they're really, really dedicated. They work all kinds of crazy hours. They actually have some test tracks behind the EB Engineering Building number 3. And eventually they may have some of those under some grants that they've been applying for elsewhere in the city in some controlled environments as this technology evolves. So that's another area. What about the CIS Center? CIS is a center. It's kind of like the Freedom Center on the smart grid, except this one's about wearables. It's one of the 2 centers led by NC State that fall in the category engineering research center. There's only 2 universities in the country that can boast leading 2 of these kind of centers, and this one's focused on wearables. Now, what do we mean by the wearables, and what's the focus here? Here it's about low-powered nanosensors, things that I can either insert in my body, tape to my body to monitor, chemical interactions, thermal gradient. And the way it works is it creates the electricity to make the chips work without batteries because of my kinetic movement or my thermal gradient in my body. This is very leading edge stuff, and it's another area if you start to think about healthcare and smart cities as for instance. And deep dive analytics, there are a lot of types of artificial intelligence in the world to digest very complex, massive data sets. All the data in the world doesn't do you any good if you can't glean some insights from it and take actions. And I was down at a conference in Orlando here a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lot of talk about AI, and there was a kind of an emphasis on artificial intelligence, not just for the sake of creating that function, but to be able to do it real time so you could solve real problems on the fly. And that means you got to have enormous, computational problems, like a machine visioning on a tractor to decide where to spray the herbicide so you don't blanket the field unnecessarily, which is costly and causes environmental problems, that sorts of thing. And there are companies working on that are in that kind of equipment area. And then here's one, just only 2 other things I'll share with you. Now this is pushing the envelope. NC State's in process of standing up what we call a quantum hub, IBM Q Hub at NC State. It'll have a number of industrial partners as well as universities and in some cases maybe some national labs. And the idea behind this, we'd have access to these machines. In that off to the right is kind of the business end of a quantum computing machine. We kind of refer to that sometimes as the golden chandelier. It's all gold plated. The business end of it is at the very bottom, not shown there, and that whole assembly is housed in that white cylinder called a cryostat. And the cryostat, or sometimes referred to as a dilution refrigerator, that's located at IBM's facility up in Yorktown Heights Research Center in New York. And the hub will have remote access via cloud to those machines. I might add, at the bottom of that thing is where the business end of that chandelier fits, and that's been purported to be the coldest place in the universe and also the darkest place in the universe in terms of photons. It operates at almost absolute zero. And the reason it has to work at those conditions is that because if you didn't, the noise levels would be such that this exotic and complex technology based on quantum mechanics simply wouldn't work. It's very embryonic. It's not ready for prime time yet, but over the next 3 to 20 years, you're going to see some profound differences because quantum computing can digest information in ways that classical computers cannot do that today. IBM will point out that an example would be the molecules in your coffee cup there, the caffeine molecule. You cannot possibly model that with accuracy using classical computers today. It's just not possible because there's too many permutations. So if you think of optimization problems, that's one of the power of quantum computing, but that technology requires classical computing to make it operate. And so there's a lot of research in making those trade-offs, and that's what will be part of the mission. So I just share that with you because that's now pushing out onto the next frontier. But at some point, you're going to want to have those kind of capabilities, and we're better to be able to take advantage of that with a partnership with the university. And then this is one here that you heard Kyle Schneider talk earlier about the unmanned aerial systems, or UAVs, or sometimes referred to as drones and so forth. This project here is one that NC State has made a submission to NSF. The hope is they will make the short list. And what this will be about is advanced wireless. This would be like 5G and beyond. And the reason you have the UAVs here is a mechanism. These vehicles would be used for things like medical drops, emergency response, ways to mitigate bad drones from coming in and stealing the space. There's many, many different applications. So this is just a little graphic to give you some idea. The important thing to take away here is if the university, and it has a number of partners, has 2 other universities, another independent entity. There will be municipalities like Raleigh, City of Raleigh, and others that will be participating, and they will be submitting this proposal to the National Science Foundation coming up in around December. And if it plays out favorably, you know something about this in the first quarter of next year. So we got our fingers crossed. It looks like a pretty strong proposal. I share that with you because it's in the spirit of advanced wireless research. NC State's already has some test beds on campus that I didn't mention, like we have one that was put in place about 5 years ago called ScentMesh. It's a network of outdoor research antennas. They're on top of the light poles. Most people don't even know what they are. You can see them if you know what to look for. But you think of it as an environment that you can do experimental research, both from a real research as well as student training and so forth. So there are faculty members that use that. And if we were to win this, they will start by deploying some of that on the campus and then probably down on the farms down at Lake Wheeler Road, because you still have to fly these drones around. And then over time, this would migrate as part of the plan in stages to the city. The reason this one's particularly important, if we can win it, is because it would be an infrastructure that others could use to do experimental work. So it's a way of advancing the state of the art in this advanced new wireless domain in ways that we can't do today, but to be able to really test drive it in a less real environment. So that test bed, and this is a National Science Foundation solicitation that we've applied for, could be a big win for the area. So those are just some of the things that we're looking at, and I would just leave you that if you would like to find out more how you could engage with the university, I made light of the fact that we have a lot of independent operators. We clearly do. It's sometimes bewildering to figure out how to connect up with the university, and that's what we're there for. So myself, our staff that do these things, we're there to try to help, and it doesn't have to just be with the local area. It could be elsewhere in the world, as long as it appeals and works and fits in with the mission of the university. So that's a little overview of some of the things that could be as part of our partnership, Narnell, that we're proceeding with the City of Raleigh and others.